All the same, Paddington wrote the details carefully in his notebook and drew a map of the garden, putting a large X to mark the spot where the marrow had once been. Then he went back upstairs to his room in order to think things out. When he got there, he made another addition to his map, a drawing of the new house, which was being built beyond the edge of the garden. Paddington decided that was where the mysterious flashes must have come from the night before. He stared at it through his opera glasses for some time, but the only people he could see were the builders. Shortly afterwards, anyone watching the Browns' house would have seen the small figure of a bear emerge from the front door and make its way towards the market. Fortunately for Paddington's plans, no one saw him leave. Nor did anyone see him when he returned, some while later, carrying a large parcel in his arms. There was an excited gleam in his eyes as he crept back up the stairs and entered his bedroom, carefully locking the door behind him. Paddington liked parcels, and this one was particularly interesting. It took him a long time to undo the knots on the string, because his paws were trembling with excitement. But when he did pull the paper apart, it revealed a long cardboard box, very brightly colored, with the words Master Detective's Disguise Outfit on the front. Paddington had been having a battle with himself ever since he'd first seen it several days before in a shop window. Although £7 seemed an awful lot of money to pay for anything, especially when you only get £1 a week pocket money, Paddington felt very pleased with himself as he emptied the contents onto the floor. There was a long black beard, some dark glasses, a police whistle, several bottles of chemicals marked Handle with Care, which Paddington hurriedly put back in the box, a fingerprint pad, a small bottle of invisible ink, and a book of instructions. It seemed a very good disguise outfit. Paddington tried writing his name on the lid of the box with the invisible ink, and he couldn't see it at all. Then he tested the fingerprint pad with his paw and blew several blasts on the police whistle under the bedclothes. He rather wished he'd thought of doing it the other way round, as a lot of the ink came off on the sheets, which was going to be difficult to explain. But he liked the beard best of all. It had 2 pieces of wire for fitting over the ears, and when he turned and suddenly caught sight of himself in the mirror, it quite made him jump. With his hat on and an old raincoat of Jonathan's, which Mrs. Brown had put out for the jumble sale, he could hardly recognize himself. After studying the effect in the mirror from all possible angles, Paddington decided to try it out downstairs. It was difficult to walk properly. Jonathan's old coat was too long for him, and he kept treading on it. Apart from that, his ears didn't seem to fit the beard as well as he would have liked, so that he had to hang on to it with one paw while he went backwards down the stairs, holding on to the banisters with the other paw. He was so intent on what he was doing that he didn't hear Mrs. Bird coming up until she was right on top of him. Mrs. Bird looked most startled when she bumped into him. "Oh, Paddington," she began, "I was just coming to see you. I wonder if you would mind going down to the market for me and fetching half a pound of butter?" "I'm not Paddington," said a gruff voice from behind the beard. "I'm Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective." "Yes, dear," said Mrs. Bird, "but don't forget the butter. We need it for lunch." With that, she turned and went back down the stairs towards the kitchen. The door shut behind her, and Paddington heard the murmur of voices. He pulled off the beard disappointedly. 35 buns worth, he said bitterly, to no one in particular. He almost felt like going back to the shop and asking for his money back. 35 buns were 35 buns, and it had taken him a long time to save that much money. But when he got outside the front door, Paddington hesitated. It seemed such a pity to waste his disguise, and even if Mrs. Bird had seen through it, Mr. Briggs, the foreman at the building site, might not. Paddington decided to have one more try. He might even pick up some more clues. By the time he arrived at the new house, he was feeling much more pleased with himself. Out of the corner of his eye, he had noticed quite a number of people staring at him as he passed. And when he'd looked at them over the top of his glasses, several of them had hurriedly crossed to the other side of the road. He crept along outside the house until he heard voices. They seemed to be coming from an open window on the first floor, and he distinctly recognized Mr. Briggs's voice among them. There was a ladder propped against the wall, and Paddington clambered up the rungs until his head was level with the windowsill. Then he carefully peered over the edge. Mr. Briggs and his men were busy round a small stove making themselves a cup of tea. Paddington stared hard at Mr. Briggs, who was in the act of pouring some water into the teapot, and then, after adjusting his beard, he blew a long blast on his police whistle. There was a crash of breaking china as Mr. Briggs jumped up. He pointed a trembling hand in the direction of the window. "Core!" he shouted. "Look! Han apparition!" The others followed his gaze with open mouths. Paddington stayed just long enough to see 4 white faces staring at him, and then he slid down the ladder on all 4 paws and hid behind a pile of bricks. Almost immediately there was the sound of excited voices at the window. "Can't see it now," said a voice. "Must have vanished." "Core," repeated Mr. Briggs, mopping his brow with a spotted handkerchief. "Whatever it was, I don't never want to see nothing like it again. Fair chilled me to the marrow, it did." With that, he slammed the window shut and the voices died away. From behind the pile of bricks, Paddington could hardly believe his ears. He had never even dreamed that Mr. Briggs and his men could be mixed up in the affair. And yet, he had definitely heard Mr. Briggs say his marrow had been chilled. After removing his beard and dark glasses, Paddington sat down behind the bricks and made several notes in his book with the invisible ink.